Hello, Professor McElhenney. This is Colin Gasper, and I'm coming back for my third video essay assignment. I just wanted to give a quick side note before I begin and say that I know this assignment was originally supposed to be an on-paper essay, and I just want to express my gratitude for you allowing me to do one more and perhaps my last video essay assignment. I was unaware of how fond of these I'd grown until I was given the opportunity to do one more. I feel that my expression through word of mouth is just more fluid and helps me say what I actually want to say instead of trying to put words down on a paper simply to reach a word limit. With that, I'm going to dive right in and hopefully wow you with one last assignment. So, the controversy that we're talking about today is between the film Wild at Heart by David Lynch, the 1990 film, which was released in 1990, and the Armond White analysis of this film. Both begin talking about the opening scene where the main character, Sailor, has his girlfriend's mother, Lula's mother, pay a black man to kill him. Sailor is able to turn this around and ends up beating the brakes off the guy. On my initial watching through, I saw this scene and thought, wow, this is really gory compared to some of the other films we've watched this semester. Armond White, however, took this scene and said, David Lynch put this in here because he wants to put the white race on a pedestal above everyone. He didn't allow the black character to develop any character, to have a personality. He was simply there to have a white man beat him down and show that, the white man won, as David Lynch thought the white man should win. I didn't particularly agree with this analysis. I did notice, however, throughout the continuation of the film that there was a serious lacking of integration of other races and ethnicities in the film compared to some of the other films that we've watched this semester. Which was sort of surprising to me because when you look on Wikipedia, the film is genred as a black comedy romantic crime film. That was shocking to me because I don't see how this film caters to the African American market in the slightest. This is definitely coming to the close of sort of the very heavily racially motivated era of, the black versus white. It just simply did not do as good of a job as some other films at, integrating other characters. The characters in the film were predominantly white. And, I think this shows the dating of the film. Some of the aspects that dated this film were the use of CGI. That worked in both directions for this film. The use of CGI in a film this early was surprising to me. Obviously was not seen in any of the other films we've watched this semester, and CGI has come a long way now, so the CGI showing the crystal ball right in the beginning, it was cutting over the fingers that were going over it, and it sort of dated itself, but, in a good way. I was happy to see the use of CGI in this film. One other big dating scene in the film was the cigarette scene where Sailor and Luna are driving to start a new life in Big Tuna, and Sailor looks over and says, Luna, that doesn't smell like your normal, cigarette you smoke, followed by him saying, oh, I only smoke Marlboros, I've smoked them since I was 4. That was sort of a characteristic of older generations that, modern generations have not continued. I think the majority of, the modern youth doesn't smoke and probably couldn't relate to that scene. So, that was an interesting aspect of the film that dated it, in my opinion. Another aspect of the film that I found interesting was the use of rock and roll. In the 90s, the rock and roll group was sort of drawing in the youth and they were kind of the outcast group of the time, similarly to the hippies in the 70s. You know, there was also sort of this connection between rock and roll and sex. You know, it was played over, before, during, and after the sex scenes. And Armond White also had a problem with the amount of sexuality shown in the film, which I felt that this film sort of took both aspects from Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, because it was definitely on par in the aspect of sexual content that's shown, and Night of the Living Dead with the amount of violence and gore that was in that movie, and sort of combined them into one. And I think that also shows the progression of, the filmmaking industry, as I felt Sweet Sweetbacks and Night of the Living Dead sort of picked one taboo topic and incorporated it in their movie, and that's why they were able to slide under the radar. The fact that this, is able to combine both and still got published, while it was not the most popular in the test showings. The first one, 90 people walked out, and the second one, 100 people walked out. But the fact that it was published this way shows the progression in, years of these films that we've watched. Armond White had a problem with the amount of sexuality that David Lynch put in this film as well, and, quote, says, "If Lynch were an instinctive artist of this era, rather than a solipsistic expressionist, he would make movies about people trying to put the lid on their libidos instead of seeking to relieve themselves of inhibitions." End quote. This was another part of his analysis that I didn't particularly agree with. I feel that, human beings are not perfect creatures, and especially with me growing up and seeing more, and being at the college age, talks of sex and sexual acts are a pretty relevant topic. I think it's, human nature, and it sort of added an aspect of realism and relatability to the movie, rather than, detracting from the film as Armond White felt. It does sort of further the, gender wars, which I thought was coming to a close at this time, but, you see Lula's mother, who sort of entices men with the promise of sexual acts or monetary compensation to go hunt down and kill Sailor. And on, the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Mr. Reindeer and all of his, female servants who always had to have their tops off. There's also a quote in the movie where a lady says, "Women, you're not just a pretty face, you're here to make Mr. Reindeer happy." You see both sides of this gender war, which, I don't feel is as strong today. There's definitely people who feel that there is, and I just didn't feel that it was that pertinent of an aspect in the movie. One interesting scene that I saw was, the talk of murder on the radio when Lula's driving makes her go insane and freak out and get out of the car, and she can't listen to one more second of all the talk, the sad talk on the radio, only to have Sailor, turn on the rock and roll or the metal and have them start thrashing right next to the car. And I think that's sort of funny, and it also parallels, the fact that, some people, it shows what people are and are not okay with, seeing or hearing or, dealing with in entertainment. This film had a very strong relation to The Wizard of Oz, with Lula having red shoes and her mother being the Wicked Witch of the West, even Sailor seeing the Good Witch of the East at the end of the movie and changing his mind after, he killed the ending for me and was acting like a scumbag. It was sort of interesting to see that they could do that, and that they did do that. Another interesting aspect for me was that this film seemed to set the standard for many of the modern day princess movies, uh, you know, such as Tangled. You have this ideal of the overprotecting mother who wants at will do anything in her power to stop her, sheltered daughter, her pride and joy, from experiencing the world as she wants. Um, it was interesting for me to, pick up on that, because it was blatantly evident throughout the movie. And it was just interesting that, you know, this, through the progression of, years, these plot lines sort of stayed the same. And, perhaps that's just what sells in the movie industry, but it, was interesting for me. Another thing that Armond White seemed to have a big problem with was, you know, uh, David Lynch's implementation of, sexuality and violence throughout the movie. He sort of talked about it detracting from the values of, the movie. But I felt that, David Lynch created this movie as he wanted it to be seen. Um, I felt that he expressed himself in the way that he wanted to express himself. And I think that Armond White's problem with it was that, you know, even as I mentioned earlier, some of the audience was really not for the movie. The test showings were sort of unsuccessful. Um, I think that for David Lynch to change the way that he, created this film in any aspect would detract from his true expression. And I think that, Armond White puts up the point that, you know, the way Armond White looks at it is sort of the aspect that would make the production crew happy. It would, it plays the safe role, it attracts the most viewership, and, it generally is more successful. But I think David Lynch took this into his own hands and sort of created a film that, like it or not, he was in control of, all the, sex scenes and scenes of violence, and they added in their own ways to the film as a whole. There are some pretty intense scenes, especially talking about Lula and, sexual violence. Um, they do shoo away some viewers, but in modern day, we've sort of come to terms with that it's a topic that needs to be addressed and that we need to talk about it. And, it's sort of tough to look at some of these films, even though this one was released in 1990, you think it's pretty close to the modern era, but in actuality, a lot of our, the topics and taboos that society is okay with talking about now were completely beyond talking about then. So this film, was definitely a progressive film for its time, and I think it, has held up pretty well against the test of time. I think, it was an enjoyable movie. Like I said, the ending was ruined until Sailor saw the Good Witch. I thought he was a scumbag, and then he went back, and I did enjoy the ending of this movie, and I enjoyed this movie throughout. It was definitely fun and easier to analyze compared to my own experiences and personal beliefs than some of the older ones that were sort of detached from my, experiences and lifetime. So, all in all, I have really enjoyed this film as well as every other one that we've watched this semester, and I appreciate you one more time for letting me do a video essay, and hopefully you have a good day. Thanks.